Welcome to this training video. My name's Anne from Orchid Systems, and in this training video I'm going to run through inter-entity trade, specifically OE-PO trade. Inter-entity trade automates transactions between companies. It works within one Sage 300 company database and/or across multiple Sage 300 company databases. It can create mirrored transactions when companies buy and sell goods and services from each other, and it can create marked up or marked down transactions to recover or recharge goods and services from and to each other. Inter-entity trade consists of two portions, AP to AR trade or AR to AP trade, and this is covered by a separate training video. This allows you to map vendors to customers and customers to vendors and mirror transactions between the customers and vendors. You can optionally choose which transactions you want to mirror, invoices, credit notes, and receipts. And you can mark the transactions up or down when they're created in the target database. You can map your expense to revenue accounts, and you can automatically create elimination entries to eliminate the intercompany profit on consolidation. It supports project and job costing codes and optional fields. And it can be used with inter-entity transactions, GL triggers, to mirror AP and AR transactions, for example, rent received on behalf of another entity. Instead of showing the amount in a loan account, you can show the amount owing in AP and AR. Or the other functionality included in inter-entity trade is OE to PO or PO to OE trade, and this is the subject matter of this training video. Here too you can map vendors to customers and customers to vendors to mirror transactions, but you can also map ship buyers to customers and ship buyers to vendors for intercompany purchases and sales, and you use this when you don't want the entire transaction to be mirrored, but only certain items to be placed on the mirrored transaction. You can mirror orders, invoices, returns, and credit notes, and you can mark up or mark down the orders, invoices, returns, and credit notes where appropriate. You can optionally map the IC item codes between the companies, and it supports IC serial numbers and lot numbers, project and job costing codes, and optional fields. In this training video, we're going to install and activate the module, check the license file, and assign the visual process flows, which helps with the setup and transaction processing. Then we're going to configure inter-entity trade. In inter-entity setup trade options, we're going to fill in the OE-PO trade and integration tabs. We're also going to use the trade organization setup to create the necessary user ID and passwords for target companies. We need to have AP vendors and AR customers for the mapped transactions, and we need OE ship via or PO ship via codes for the ship via to account mapped transactions. And then in inter-entity setup, we fill in the OE PO trade partners and define the rules for that particular trade partnership. Then we're going to go ahead and process transactions. We're going to enter source transactions, either order entry or purchase orders, and post the transactions. And then we're going to see the resulting PO or OE transactions either in the source database or the target database, depending on our configuration. And when errors occur, we're going to check the OE-PO audit inquiry. And we're going to use the OE-PO periodic processing to reprocess the errors. All our modules can be downloaded from www.orchid.systems. First, you need to log in, and then either click Product Downloads or Resources, and then select the version you want. Per version, you will find the sample data, object model, NFR serial numbers that can be used for 30-day activations, and then all our modules. Inter-entity transactions and inter-entity trade is one download from the website. So you download this program, and depending on your serial number and activation code, different options will be made available. Once you've downloaded, you can install the programs. As I've already installed the programs, it's not prompting me for my serial number and activation code, but you can fill in a serial number and select 30-day activation if you want, or key in your serial number and activation code. And then within Sage 300, you would go and activate inter-entity transactions in those databases that you want to use it. And after activating, we recommend you assign the visual process flow to those users who are going to do the setup for OEPO trade and the transaction processing for OEPO trade. The top half of the visual process flow relates to the setup of OEPO trade, and the bottom half relates to the transaction processing with OEPO trade. But before getting stuck into the setup, let's just look at our license code. And with an inter-entity trade license code, you can see the license code here. And in the inter-entity setup, you only have the trade options. If I had a bundle license, I would see all the inter-entity transactions options as well. And the final setting you need to check in About Licenses, Current Users on the IAP tab, you need to ensure that this workstation uses Integration Access Pack licenses for external applications is deselected. If you have not purchased additional IAPs, you must not leave this option selected, otherwise you will run out of IAPs and you'll get IAP errors in your audit trail. Without this option selected, Inter-Entity Trade will use a concurrent LAN pack to do transactions in target databases. The first example we're going to do for OEPO trade is a mirrored purchase order to order entry using the account-to-account mappings. In SAM Ltd, we're going to enter a purchase order. An inter-entity trade will automatically create a sales order in SAM Inc. And then when we go into SAM Inc and ship an invoice the sales order, inter-entity trade will automatically receive an invoice the purchase order. Using the inter-entity trade OEPO visual process flow, the top half of the visual process flow covers the OEPO trade setup, and the bottom half covers using OEPO trade. In the setup, the first thing you need to consider is the security, who has access to set up the inter-entity trade options. And then in the inter-entity setup trade options on the OEPO trade options tab, you must turn on use OE trade if you want to automate purchase orders from sales orders from this database, and use PO trade if you want to automate sales orders from purchase orders recorded in this database. And in our case, we're going to enter the PO in SAM Ltd and have it create the PO in SAM Inc. And then you turn on the options for all the transactions. So when I create the purchase order, it's going to create the sales order. Do I allow changes to the purchase order to flow onto the sales order? When I create the PO receipt, it will create the OE shipment. And do I allow amendments to the PO receipt to amend the OE shipment? And when I do the purchase invoice, it will create the OE invoice. And similarly for the PO return to the OE credit note. And you can also force the PO ship to onto the OE ship to and overwrite the OE ship to codes in the target database. And you would turn on these same options if you were starting from an order entry point of view, and from OE you were generating PO. If you select Use Item Mapping, it implies that from the source to the target database, the items will be mapped. But if you have the same item codes across all the trade partners, then you don't need to map individual items. In our case, we're not going to map our items. And when dealing with multi-currency databases, if you've got the same functional currency, you can select Use User Specified Rate, in which case inter-entity trade will send both the source currency and the exchange rate to the target document. But if you have different functional currencies, you must leave it as Use Default Currency Rate, and inter-entity trade sends the source currency to the target transaction and then uses the common services currency exchange rates for the transaction date to translate the source currency to the home currency. Inter-entity trade OE to PO gives messages on orders and purchase order numbers being created. If you're using handheld technology or Sage CRM, you would want to not display any messages, as these messages are designed for the Sage desktop only. And then on the OEPO integration tab, you need to map for all your source documents what information gets sent to the target document. So for example, from our purchase order to our OE order, what do we want to populate the OE document number with? And if you leave this blank, it will be auto-generated. So we're going to send the purchase order reference to the sales order reference and the purchase order description to the document description. And on the comment, we're going to send the user ID and the organization ID of the source document, as well as the source document number. And you can map all of these fields, including the document on hold flag. So if I do map to the document on hold, if I put the purchase order on hold, it will put the corresponding sales order on hold. And you should complete the mappings for all the documents which SAM Ltd will be the source of. So if we're creating both sales orders and purchase orders in target databases or even in the same database, we should do the mappings for all the documents. And then you should fill in the user ID and password to be used for all the target databases. It's these credentials that are used when opening the target database and creating the document. So this user ID should have the credentials to create the documents that they need to. In our example, we're going to create a purchase order. And the vendor that we're going to use is vendor 9001. And this is the vendor when we're ordering from SAM Inc. And in our target database, in SAM Inc., we need to create the corresponding customer. And this is customer 9000, which is SAM Ltd. And after creating our vendor and our customer, we can go ahead and create our OEPO trade setup. So from PO documents, we're going to create OE documents. It is an account-to-account mapping. The source partner vendor is 9001. The target company is SAM Inc. The target partner account is 9000, SAM Ltd intercompany customer. And we've flagged this relationship as being bidirectional. This means we can do the purchase order in SAM Ltd and it will create the sales order. And we can receive the purchase order, which will force the shipment to be created in SAM Inc. And we can invoice the purchase order, which will force the shipment to be invoiced in SAM Inc. Or, as long as we do a bidirectional relationship in SAM Inc., we can do the purchase order in SAM Ltd, which will create the sales order in SAM Inc., and then we can ship in SAM Inc., and it will create the PO receipt in SAM Ltd, etc. If we mark this relationship as being primary, then it will only do this one particular relationship from the PO 9001 to this customer 9000. So if we had a second relationship, perhaps going back to another database as a sales order shipment from this purchase order receipt, then it would not do that relationship. So primary means do this one only. And in our case, later we are going to use a second relationship for our vendor, so we're not going to mark this one as primary. When creating OE documents, you can optionally choose to override the category in the target database. And when I click on this finder here, this finder for categories is in SAM Inc. And I've chosen to use an intercompany category, so my sales in my target database will be shown in the intercompany sales account. You can also optionally override the location. If you fill in a location here, then all the sales orders will be created in this one particular location. If you don't fill in a location code, it will use the location code from the source document into the target document. So in our example, we're going to use location 1, and it's going to go from location 1 to location 1 in the two companies. You can also choose to overwrite the target price list. If you don't fill in a price list code here, it will default to the customer's price list. And if you do an overall discount on the purchase order header or sales order header, you can select this option to transfer the overall discount percent to the target document. When considering, in this case, the sales order price, the unit price on each line, we have elected to override the target document price with the source price. So if our purchase order is for $100, it's going to create the sales order for $100. But you can use a multiplier to mark up or mark down. It doesn't make sense when you're trying to mirror a transaction between two companies, but we'll see later an example of using the cost multiplier. And you can choose to override the transaction line tax from the source document transaction line tax. If you do not select this option, then the tax will be recalculated in the target database based on the item and customer's settings. You can also optionally choose to include PJC fields, in which case the project, contract, and task code will be copied from the source document to the target document, but there's no mapping of these fields. So you would need to set up the project codes the same in purchase orders as you do in sales orders. And you can also optionally include serial and lot numbers. If you select this, then any serial or lot number selected on either or the purchase order or the sales order will be transferred between the companies. Had I selected item mapping, I'd have a second tab here where I could map my item codes between SAM Ltd and SAM Inc. And finally, there's no selection tick box for optional fields. If you have an optional field on the header on the source document and the same named optional field on the target document on the header, then Inter-Entity Trade will copy the values across. And before any transactions can be processed, you should ensure that this workstation uses Integration Access Pack licenses for external applications is deselected. This is a workstation by workstation setting, so you need to turn this off on each and every workstation. And this can be turned on again by version upgrades and product updates, so always check for this option. Now we've done the setup for PO to automate OE in SAM Inc. So we're going to go ahead and create a purchase order for vendor 9001. And when we post the purchase order, we will get a message of the sales order that was created in SAM Inc. So purchase order 56 has created sales order 72 in SAM Inc. And that information is recorded in the order trail. Purchase order 56 has created order 72 in SAM Inc. And in SAM Inc, we should find sales order 72 with our mapped description. And now we could either go back to SAM Ltd to receive the purchase order, which would force this order to ship, and invoice the purchase order, which would force the shipment to invoice. Or if we do the configuration of inter-entity trade in this database, then we can ship this order, which will force the purchase order to receive, and invoice the order, which will force the purchase order to invoice. And that is what we're going to do. So in inter-entity setup, on the OE-PO trade options, we're going to select OE to PO trade, and that we want to automate all these documents. And on the OE-PO integration, we're going to map the fields that we want to pass through to the target documents. So in our case, the purchase order document number will be auto-generated, but the reference will be populated, as will the description and the comment. And we've included the user ID and organization ID in this particular comment. And we've mapped all the OE to PO documents. In the trade organization setup, we need to ensure that we have an entry for SAM Ltd so that we can log into SAM Ltd and create the target documents. And in OE-PO trade setup, we need to create our relationship account to account from our customer 9000 to our vendor 9001 in SAM Ltd. And we need to specify our pricing options. In our case, any changes that we make to the sales order is going to override the purchase order unit price because we are mirroring the transactions. And in the PO audit inquiry, because we marked the relationship as bidirectional in SAM Ltd, we have that order 72 was created from purchase order 56. So now if we go ahead to ship and invoice order 72, the PO receipt 85 is created from our shipment 63. And if we go to this shipment and invoice, Inter-Entity Trade has created invoice 62 in the target database for this sales invoice number 62. And those documents will be recorded in the Inter-Entity OEPO audit trail. So shipment 63 created receipt 85, status exported, which means no errors, and invoice 62 created invoice 62, no errors. Back in SAM Ltd, our original purchase order has been receipted as receipt 85, and receipt 85 has been invoiced, and it's matched to receipt 85. So we've just seen OE to PO account-to-account mappings, the configuration and the transaction. We entered a PO in SAM Ltd. It created a sales order in SAM Inc. We shipped and invoiced the SAM Inc. sales order, which created the receipt and invoice in SAM Ltd. The next example we're going to do is OE to PO, ship via to account mappings. This is the scenario where we want to create a sales order, and for some of the items on the sales order, we want to create a purchase order. And we want to create the purchase order at a fraction of the sales order price. So we're going to enter a sales order in SAM Ltd, and it's going to create a purchase order in SAM Ltd for those lines that we want to order. And when we receive and invoice the purchase order in SAM Ltd, it's going to ship and invoice those lines in SAM Ltd. But because we're going to use the same vendor that we use to order the items from SAM Inc., when the purchase order is created, Inter-Entity Trade is going to automatically create a sales order in SAM Inc. And then when we ship and invoice the sales order in SAM Inc., it's going to come back to SAM Ltd and receive and invoice the purchase order, and in turn it will ship and invoice the original sales order. And we refer to this as chaining, when one document creates another document, which in turn creates another document, and can come all the way back to the source document if required. And the setup we need to do for this transaction is first in our trade options on the OEPO tab, we need to ensure that we have OE to PO trade turned on, and we have our OE documents mappings for our PO documents. In the trade organization setup, we need to have an entry for SAM Ltd because we're going to enter the sales order in SAM Ltd and the purchase order will be created in SAM Ltd. So we need to have an entry for the same company. And then we're going to do an OE ship via. So on our sales order, we're going to use an OE ship via called SAM Inc. And when we have the ship via SAM Inc., it'll create a purchase order for SAM Inc. for those items. And we need to have the vendor that we're mapping to, which is the vendor we created earlier, 9000 for SAM Inc. And then in the OEPO trade setup, we need to have a partner type OE to PO. It's ship via to account. The ship via is SAM Inc. and that will create a PO in SAM Ltd for vendor 9001. And when we create the PO, we're going to override the unit cost with the sales order price multiplied by 0.8, and that's going to go to the PO cost. And we've made this bidirectional because when the PO is received, we want it to come back to the sales order and ship and invoice the sales order. And for that, we need a second relationship, a reverse relationship for PO to OE, the account 9001 to ship via in company SAM Ltd, and the ship via is SAM Inc, and it's bidirectional. And we're going to send the PO cost to the OE unit cost. We're going to record our sales order for our retail customer for the 3 items. And for those items that we want to purchase from SAM Inc., we're going to use the ship via code on the detail line of SAM Inc. Had we wanted all the lines to default to that ship via, we could have used that ship via on the header, and then as we inserted the lines, they would get that ship via code automatically. But we've chosen to change only on those lines that we want to order from SAM Inc. And the unit price is $59.99 and $50.35 respectively. When we go ahead and post this sales order, Inter-Entity Trade creates sales order 73 in SAM Inc. for purchase order 57 in SAM Ltd. and creates purchase order 57 for sales order 89 in SAM Ltd. And those document numbers are recorded in the audit trail. So if we filter using Control F to filter on those documents that have been created today, we see that we have 3 audit entries for the document for the sales order that we've just posted. The first is the ship via to account relationship that created the purchase order number 57 from our sales order. The second audit entry is because of our relationship PO to OE from vendor 9001 to SAM Inc., customer 9000. And the third is because of our bidirectional relationship from our account to ship via from vendor 9001 back to our ship via SAM Inc. And in SAM Ltd, we see the purchase order number 57 for vendor 9001 for the 2 line items for the quantities of 5 and 3 respectively. And the unit cost is 80% of the unit price on the sales order. And in SAM Inc. for customer 9000, SAM Ltd, we see the 2 line items for quantities of 5 and 3 respectively, and we notice that the IC category has been overwritten to our intercompany category code. And the unit price matches the purchase unit cost. And we have a reference back to the purchase order that created this document. From here, if we ship all and invoice, Inter-Entity Trade creates receipt 86 for shipment 63. And for receipt 86, it creates shipment 64 in SAM Ltd. And in SAM Ltd, it's created sales invoice 62 for purchase invoice 63. And purchase invoice 63 was created from sales invoice 63 in SAM Inc. And in the audit trail in SAM Inc., if we filter on date created for today, we see the original sales order 73 being created by purchase order 57. Then we see when we shipped, we got shipment 64, which created receipt 86. And when we invoiced, we got invoice 63, which created purchase invoice 63, as we are mapping the invoice number through to the target database. And in the audit trail of SAM Ltd, first we see shipment 64 in SAM Inc. creating receipt 86 in SAM Ltd, and then receipt 86 in SAM Ltd creating shipment 63 in SAM Ltd. And then we see invoice 63 in SAM Inc. creating purchase invoice 63 in SAM Ltd. Purchase invoice 63 in SAM Ltd creates sales invoice 62. And looking at those documents, first in PO, we see PO 57 has been receipted by receipt 86, and invoice 63 has been applied to receipt 86. And our original sales order has been shipped by shipment 63 and invoiced by invoice 62. And we can see that the shipment was only for the first and the third line for quantities 5 and 3 respectively, and similarly for the invoice. In this last example, we have seen entering a sales order in SAM Ltd and using the ship via of SAM Inc. to do a purchase order for those items we want to order from SAM Inc. And then Inter-Entity Trade creates the corresponding sales order in SAM Inc. to supply those goods. And then when we ship and invoice the sales order in SAM Inc., it receives and invoices the purchase order in SAM Ltd, which in turn ships and invoices those items that have been received to the customer. And in this last example, I'm going to show you how to deal with errors. In this scenario, we have turned on Use Item Mapping, but we have not mapped any items in our OEPO trade partners. Accordingly, when we post our purchase order, we expect to have errors. And here we're unable to create the sales order in SAM Inc. for this purchase order. And in the order trail, we will find the reason. So this is an error entry, and it's telling us that item A11030 is not appropriately mapped from the source to the target database. Once we correct the error, in this case I'm going to turn off the item mapping, we can reprocess the entry through the periodic processing. In this case, order entry OEPO trade periodic processing. And we're going to do all documents in the error or invalid status. And back in the order trail, if we refresh, we should see that error disappear. The typical audit errors are unmapped items, ex-API errors when there's no available LAN packs, missing or inactive customers or items, and locked fiscal periods. In summary, we have seen the setup required in AP and AR and OE and PO. In the source company, we need to create the intercompany vendors and customers and the order entry ship vires and PO ship vire codes. And in the target company, we also need to create the intercompany customers and vendors, OE ship vire and PO ship vire codes. In inter-entity setup, we need to configure the trade options, both on the OEPO Trade tab and on the OEPO Integration tab. We also need to create a user ID and a password for all the target trade organizations in Trade Organization Setup. And we need to configure our OEPO Trade partners and the rules for each partnership. And then we can go ahead and post our transactions, orders, purchase orders, shipments, receipts, invoices, and credit notes. And we've seen how to use the OEPO audit inquiry to check for any errors that have happened and also to check for target document numbers, and how to use the OEPO periodic processing to reprocess any error entries. Thank you for watching this OEPO Trade training webinar. Please go to www.orchid.systems for further information on inter-entity trade and all our other modules.